Samarzia sued Redeemer Lutheran and his former pastor and won, but the victory has been a bitter one.
I-Team 6 reporter Barbara Riles joins us with a look at why the man who won in court feels he lost the battle.
Well, Michelle and Mark, David Samarzia took his case to court with the hopes of protecting children from sexual abuse. But he says despite his court victory, he failed in his goal, leaving kids at risk.
You couldn't have got lower because I did end up with suicide attempts, lost my business, financially almost filed bankruptcy or did lose things.
Samarzia's story began when he was just 10. As a child, his pastor, Reverend Daniel Reeb, sexually abused him.
And did you masturbate?
Yes, and he did.
With the admission of child sexual abuse, Samarzia won the case. But Reeb had no money, and the church refused to pay. Finally, after 8 years of bitter battles, the court ordered the church sold to raise the money. But Samarzia said he wanted justice, not a payoff.
I didn't want any other child hurt.
Yeah. Oh, good boy, good boy.
But that's where Samarzia says he's failed. Because he repressed the memory of the abuse, it was 30 years before he took the case to court. By that time, it was too late to press criminal charges.
The witnesses to the crimes are children oftentimes. They suffer in silence, they suffer in secrecy and shame, and they are unable to report it.
The case of Daniel Reeb was heard in civil court, and even with the pastor's admission of multiple episodes of child sex abuse, Reeb never went to prison and has no criminal record.
From the court standpoint, you know, in terms of the actual proceeding, all we do is reflect the jury's ultimate decision and enter a money judgment.
I-Team 6 tracked Reeb after he left Duluth and found he continued to associate with children. First, while working in a church-sponsored orphanage in Nassau, Bahamas, and later while living in Denver, Colorado, he provided foster care for at least 15 young boys.
When was the last time you had foster kids?
A year ago.
About a year ago?
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of the last foster kid?
I'll talk to you if he tells me.
Unlike criminal cases where entire neighborhoods are notified when a sex offender moves in, there's no registry for those who go through civil court. No record logged, even when the offender has molested multiple children, and even when he admits it. That means child welfare agencies have no way to check up on potential foster or adoptive parents.
What happens as a result of that is we put more children at risk, we put more families at risk, we end up perpetuating the cycle of violence.
Mark and Michelle, many believe this is a glaring and dangerous loophole. People in any walk of life, from teachers and school bus drivers to pastors and coaches, could have been found in civil court to have molested children. But with no statewide or national record, it's almost impossible to check up on them.
That's frightening, Barbara. Is anyone doing anything about this?
Well, David Samarzia has made it his mission to try to change the system to protect children. You'll hear from him, plus others who are now aware of this problem, tomorrow night at 10.
We'll look forward to it. Thank you very much, Barb.
An I-Team 6 report on a Duluth man's fight for justice has caught the attention of lawmakers.
Sex offenders are required by law to register with police, but only when they're found guilty in criminal court.
I-Team 6 reporter Barbara Riles joins us with more on what some are calling a legal loophole. Barbara?
Well, Mark and Michelle, if a sex offender is tried in civil court, there's no prison sentence or requirement to register with police, even if the offender admits the sex abuse. More than 95% of the child sex abuse cases that go to trial are dealt with in civil court because most victims don't come to terms with what's happened to them until it's too late to file criminal charges. David Samarzia was just 10 years old when he was molested by his pastor. He didn't tell anyone then, but after years of counseling, he decided to bring Reverend Daniel Reeb to justice.
I didn't want anybody else to go through what I did throughout my life.
It was too late to file criminal charges, so Samarzia took his case to civil court. There, Pastor Reeb admitted to abusing not only Samarzia, but several other boys in his congregation. Under oath, he talked about what he did to the children.
Did you place your hand upon his penis?
Yes.
But despite the admission of guilt, Reeb never went to prison, never paid a fine, and never had to register as a sex offender, all because the case was heard in civil court.
The court simply enters and dockets a judgment for money damages.
The case had little effect on Reeb. In the 10 years after the trial, he went on to run an orphanage and provide foster care for at least 15 young boys. Child welfare agencies had no way of knowing Reeb's past history of child sex abuse.
There's no way right now to have a civil adjudication follow a predator or a perpetrator.
Samarzia sued his pastor in the hopes of letting everyone know what Daniel Reeb had done. But because there's no national or even statewide record kept of civil offenses, few people learned of the sexual abuse. Minnesota State Senator Becky Laurie says knowing that sex offenders are highly likely to repeat their crime and that the majority of sex offenders are tried in civil court, there should be a record every time a person is found to have committed sexual abuse.
It's clear that if we know someone has done this, our primary responsibility is to protect the child. And so there should be a way to make sure that the perpetrator doesn't do this ever again.
One way would be a law ordering civil sex offenders to register just like criminal sex offenders do. Senator Laurie has begun drafting a bill. Meanwhile, U.S. Senators Paul Wellstone and Mark Dayton are looking into the possibility of a national database for civil sex offenders.
Anybody who commits that kind of terrible abuse of a boy or a girl should not be off the hook just because a certain amount of time has elapsed.
In the meantime, David Samarzia is writing a book about his experiences. He wants everyone to know about the loophole.
They could be teachers, counselors, doctors, daycare, own daycares.
And he wants to get some national attention focused on the problem. He's met with consultants about how to get on network talk shows and primetime news programs.
You gotta be hard, but you gotta be simple.
Samarzia, who has battled both alcoholism and depression since suffering the child sex abuse, hopes he can stay strong enough to bring about a safer place for kids. It's important to point out that there is a precedent for such a national registry. Anytime a doctor or a nurse is found to be liable in a civil lawsuit, a record is kept in the National Medical Practitioners Database. Martha Michelle?
Certainly is interesting, Barbara. Please keep us posted.